Are we ready to move on to spoilers? Should we do that?
Um,
Anything else for the non-spoiler section that we want to include?
there are a couple of things that we could add, but I don't think they'd add very much to the discussion because really, I think we'd like to get into specific examples.
Yes.
So, do you want to conclude this here and then we'll pick back up again with a bit more of a spoilery discussion? Or do you want to give a synopsis of review of about this book?
I think we could probably do the quick synopsis, I think, and then just segue right into the spoilers. Do you want to handle that, the synopsis?
No, it's your channel. It's your review. I'm just here to cheer you along.
Okay, I don't think we need to say too much. So we have here in Gardens of the Moon, we are introduced in the prologue to, and so everyone here, spoilers, so go away if you don't want to hear anything. So we're introduced very quickly to a very intense period of transition where there's some kind of commotion going on in Malaz, which is the place that the empire gets its name from. It's no longer the capital or anything like that, but it's just a kind of a rundown place. But we are watching things from the viewpoint of a boy whose name is Ganos Paran. And he is next to a very important figure, a soldier who is very high ranking. And he is witnessing this commotion, and there's something very important going on here. The boy isn't quite aware of, but the man next to him is. And this is actually the point at which the old empire is falling. The emperor and his right-hand man are being displaced by the empress, Lasine. And so this is where the prologue begins. And Ganos is looking at this commotion and he's saying, he is interested in being a soldier. And Whiskey Jack, the veteran commander next to him, has a thing or two to say about that. I can't remember exactly what he says, but something to the effect of, you don't really want to do this, and it's better not to be noticed, particularly better not to be noticed by the gods. I have my book here. I could look it up. But from there, the book moves on to years later, and a couple things happen, actually. Before we get to Pale, there's the massacre, right, at Itko Khan, and this is a part of the empire. And you get the sense that there are some divisions here, and that maybe, I don't think this is a spoiler at all, really, but there is a presence here that is interfering. And there are these gods. They're kind of the new gods on the block, I guess. But there's Shadow Throne, or Amanas, and his right-hand man, Cotillion, or the Rope. And they are up to some mischief. They are interfering with the empire. And they have these hounds. They are the rulers of the realm of shadow, and their hounds have wreaked havoc in this place, causing a massacre. And almost witness to this massacre was an important character, a young girl. I mentioned the witch Riga earlier. And so that happens. And a few years later, again, we get into the Siege of Pale. And they're on this other continent now called Genabacus. And they are the Malazan Empire. The army is there to basically take over this continent. That's what empires do. They take over territories, and they're taking over this continent. And there are two major cities left that they have their sights on. One is Pale. And they've been at it for a while. The siege has been going on for years, I think. And so, things have been at a standstill, and we are basically swept into this moment of utter cataclysm. And it's interesting because it doesn't give us the cataclysm first. It gives us the aftermath. And that's, I think, something you wanted to talk about, perhaps. Yeah. So we get the aftermath first, and we get it from the viewpoint initially of Tattersail. And then we get the flashback to what led to this moment. So do you want to talk about that now, actually, before we move on to the rest of the plot? But we don't have to do everything in order. But why does Erikson do that? Why, in when the rest of the plot goes more or less chronologically, do we get Tattersail and initially after this huge moment, and then we get the flashback?
Well, I mean, one of the things, now, obviously, I cannot speak exactly for what Steve was. As much as I've discussed this with him, I don't know the secrets swirling around inside his brain.
Right.
But one of the things that's mentioned in this is the release of sorcery, both by Rick and by Tayshrin and the other High Mages, has worn the reality thin, and chaos is leaking through.
Yeah.
And this is the only point in the book where linear progression is actually disrupted.
Interesting.
That this battle was so intense, it's actually disrupted the narrative, and it's placed the aftermath before the actual thing happened.
Oh, I love that. Huh.
So thematically, it actually ties into the fact that this was such a cataclysmic event, magically, that chaos has invaded the narrative itself and repositioned the plot in that way.
That's brilliant. I love it. There's just so many interesting narrative touches in here, and we get more of them later as we move from Pale, which is obviously annihilated in this cataclysm, and the most of the focus shifts to the last remaining independent city and on Genabakis, which the Malazan Empire has its sights on, and that is Darujistan. And we meet a very interesting cast of characters there. And I particularly am interested in this character, Kripp, who, I mean, you talk about narrative risks and talk about really meta narratives and stuff like that. And the character Kripp. Now, we can't say a ton about future books because his role gets super interesting, but there's some nice foreshadowing, I think, in here to be on the lookout for if you're reading the series for the first time. Pay attention to Kripp, because, and you'll see right here in this book, and we're assuming you've read it because you're listening to these spoilers, but Kripp is both a character in the story, and I feel like at times he is somehow strangely witnessing the story as well, as in his dreams, right? When he has these dreams in which elder gods appear, like Kroll, and particularly later on when he's able to halt the advance of the Jagat tyrant through a dream. It's just, Kripp is a character who, in a way, and I'm saying this in a good way, he doesn't quite fit here, does he? I mean, there's something interesting about this guy. What are your thoughts on, because you're the narratologist here, I'm really interested in what you have to say about Kripp.
Well, first of all, the very first time I read Gardens of the Moon, I couldn't stand Kripp. Again, it was jarring for me to come across a character like this. Reading it this time, Kripp was one of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
Not only, remember what we were talking about earlier about perceptions of characters.
Yeah.
And when we first see Kripp, the sort of perception we have of Kripp is what other people see. That he's constantly sweating, he's overweight, he's constantly has crumbs everywhere, he's unkempt, he's always stuffing his face, he's quite cherubic. Right. And it challenges our perception because quite often we judge a book by its cover. We judge someone on how they look. As ridiculous as it sounds, we are all guilty of this.
Yeah.
And Erikson puts this front and center by putting Kripp in. And Kripp plays on that. He uses the fact that no one sees him as threatening, no one sees him as anything more than a minor mage, to allow him to hide the fact that he is has a brilliant intellect. Yeah. He is significantly powerful. He is an adept with various forms of magic.
Yeah.
And he is a power player in politics, spying, and the running of the city without anyone knowing.
And he flaunts it too when he wears the cherub mask later on, right? He's kind of announcing himself in the most clever way possible.
And so there's a brilliant sequence where Kripp is walking through the marketplace, and he's talking away and gesticulating, And all of those gesticulations hide the fact that he is casting spells and stealing stuff. And he's just stealing stuff as he's walking along.
Yeah.
And because he's this character, it's hiding things in plain sight.
Yeah.
That wonderful thing that a lot of stage magicians talk about.
Yeah.
And that's what Erikson does with Kripp. And Kripp himself, the reader is let in on this secret about him very early on. And that's when we are in Kripp's dream and we see all of the different aspects of his personality personified. Right. And then he walks out, and then I think it's humility is the one, and he goes, no, Kripp doesn't need that.
He leaves it hanging. Yes, humility. Yeah.
So Kripp is this fascinating character that Erikson uses for metatextual commentary as a plot device. He's not quite a Deus Ex Machina, but
no,
Erikson has the ability to use Kripp to do things in the narrative that another author may have used some sort of Deus Ex Machina for.
Yes.
But Erikson has created a character that has that ability because we know that Kripp, through his power, through his dreams, has a way of transcending different realities.
Yeah.
So that gives a lot of flexibility to the narrative. And then it also challenges this position about, do people with power always have to come across as being powerful?
Uh-huh.
And Erikson again challenges this notion. Now, I know that Ruth and Bad on his channel had done a video about Animander Rake being overrated. Huh. And it was a very interesting argument. And it's not necessarily that I disagree with Animander Rake being overrated. What I disagree with is Animander, the character, is perfectly written and is a brilliant character and one of my favorites in the series.
Sure.
But Erikson has no control over how other people describe him, which is where overrating comes from. If readers take that character and exaggerate him or exaggerate aspects of him, Erikson has no control over that. The narrative has no control over that.
Yeah.
When we see Rake as a character introduced at the Siege of Pale, he's introduced from the Malazan point of view. So as a reader, when we're launched into this war zone, this siege, and because the point of view rests with the Malazans, we immediately are on the side of the Malazans because that's the information we're getting, that's the perspective we're getting.
Right.
And Rake is described as the Dark Lord of Moonspawn, the Chaos Main. Like he has all of these grandiose titles. And as a fantasy reader, you're immediately going, oh, so like he's Sauron? Oh, he's Voldemort?
Right.
Oh, he's the evil big bad guy?
Right.
And that's how Erikson initially projects Rake. Because it's this perception, this external perception.
Yeah.
And yet he undercuts it almost immediately.
Oh, entirely. And it's a lesson in the unreliability of the narrator often here, right? So you need to understand when you're reading this series that when you're getting the perspective of a certain character, that is the perspective of the character. And that might not hold when you have a different character's perspective. So the fundamental unreliability of the narrator is something I feel like Stephen Erikson plays with a lot and in very interesting ways. So, I just have to say, beware if you like hard truths, beware of the series because you don't always get hard truths here. And I think this is a nice segue into the whole what Erikson and Esselman too, to a great degree. I think they are really great at taking tropes and doing some really interesting things with them. You mentioned Animander Rake. He's the Lord of Darkness, right? Darkness and chaos are supposed to be traditionally bad things. Sauron, right, or whatever. This is the evil force. We're so used to thinking in terms of dichotomies, and that's not what we get here. In fact, when you look at Opon, for example, Opon is a force of chaos. It's kind of like Loki in Norse mythology a bit, Loki, before Ragnarok at least, Loki helped out the gods. He was a handy guy to have around. He was a bit of a mischief too, and so he would get them into situations that he'd often get them out of. I feel like Opon is a lot like that too. You know, there's good and there's bad luck. And the chaos is not something that's purely bad, and nor is darkness. In fact, the more you get to know Anomander Rake, to me at least, and maybe this is especially true because I did read the first two books of the Carcanis trilogy. Mm-hmm. And I feel in Forge of Darkness and Fall of Light, I really feel like I got layers to this character. I'm not going to spoil that for anybody who hasn't read those, but Anomander Rake is a fascinating character. And he's, again, you know, I mentioned before how when you're part of a big structure of power, you can feel helpless. That might even be more true the more power you have. So somebody like Lassine or somebody like Anomander Rake, their choices have been limited and limited and limited to the point where they almost have no choice. And so he becomes a deeply sympathetic character in that sense, I think, and one that you feel you better not judge too quickly, I think.
But I mean, speaking only about Gardens of the Moon, what you get revealed about Rake is absolutely fascinating because obviously he's initially described as this Dark Lord, this Chaos Main. So we get this very pejorative description.
Tradition. Yeah.
And this, remember when we were first talking about this, I said there's a section quite early on that sold me on this series. And the section actually is here. In that opening of that chapter, Tattersail mentions something at the end of the Siege of Peel, and it's then returned to at the end of that section when the sort of sequencing reorders itself after that chaos intervention. And it's following the fall of Peel, the Moranth go in and slaughter 20,000 men, women, and children.
Yep.
Because Peel was a trade rival.
Yep.
Not Peel had gone in and slaughtered 20,000 Moranth. Peel beat them on trade deals.
Yep.
So in retribution, who we think of as the good guys, because we're with the Malazans, their allies walk in and slaughter 20,000 people, men, women, and children. Yeah. And it was at that moment that I went, the Siege of Peel is the Siege of Gondor, except the Malazans are the orcs.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an empire. It's hungry.
That suddenly seeing that inversion, and this is something obviously that's both Erikson and Esmond do, this inversion or subversion of tropes.
Yeah.
And we see this is exactly what you're talking about chaos and order and about darkness and light, that this is all playing into this, that Erikson took that perspective of, you're going to think that these are the good guys. I'm going to make you care about them. But what they are doing is a war atrocity. They're the bad guys. They're invading. They are conquering. And when you realize that, Anomander Rake, for 3 years or just over 2 years, 3 years, I think the Siege of Peel is, has been defending someone else's city from the Malazans.
Right.
And you go, well, it doesn't seem particularly evil to me. And then we get to that sequence later on where we have those conversations between Rake and Baruch the High Alchemist.
Yes.
And it is heartbreaking when you find out the reason why Anomander Rake involves the Tistandi in any of these things. He goes, we are a dying people.
Yep.
They are suffering from attenuated ennui. He goes, we have no desire to live anymore. Yeah. And I am trying to find anything on this planet to keep my people alive, to keep them engaged in something, to give them any sense of life. Yeah. And the brutality of that, thinking that you are in control of an entire people and you see them dying every day and they don't care about anything. So you have to try and hold them together.
Give them a purpose.
He's been doing this for thousands of years.
Yeah. It's brilliant. And there's an echo of that. There's lots of echoes of this. How about Riga in the beginning? When the young woman who we know as Sari, we never actually learn her name, her real name, is possessed by Cotillion. Before that happens, you have this encounter where Sari, I'm going to call her Sari, even though that wasn't her name then, is watching this column of Malazan cavalry go by with admiration. And she is kind of, has this romantic idea. Oh, look at the shiny armor and all that. And Riga comes along and pulls her by the hair and, and says, no, that's not what this is. The prod and pull, she's trying to, this is not glorious. And some soldier sees that and strikes Riga. And Riga, being a seeress, I have to think that she knew what was coming, that she must have sensed Cotillion's presence, because Cotillion was there. At any rate, whatever the case, whether she sensed it or not, what we learn later on in the book, near the end actually, and we learn it from Mallet, the healer, is that this presence, Riga, didn't just die. She entered Sari almost simultaneously with Cotillion. And she has spent all this time protecting this young woman's mind from the ravages of being used by this god and the atrocities that she's committed. And you realize, oh my God, this poor old, this woman who had seen so much loss. She had lost her, I forget, her husbands and her sons to war, to the Malazan Empire. And she commits this beautiful act in dying that is just absolutely, it's just all over the place here.
Okay, I'm going to mess with you a little bit here,
okay,
because you can add a bit more to this analysis. All right. First of all, earlier on that Riga has been involved in possessing Sari because Erikson writes in that she keeps spitting. It's a tick that Riga exhibits. Right. And as soon as that sequence happens and she dies, Sari spits. So the implication is already there that Riga,
and she says prod and pull, I think. Yeah.
So what we have in that sequence is Riga, the wax witch, the seeress, has pulled her hair. The soldier, seeing an old woman assaulting a young girl, does the right thing and protects the young girl.
Very
unknowingly, then killing the old woman. And you go, oh, that poor old woman. Oh, I feel so terrible. That soldier was so mean and nasty. But then you recall that she's a wax witch. And the reason she has the candles is, oh, I lost my loved ones. And I use the wax candles to speak to them. She's bound the souls of her husband and children to the candles.
Huh.
She's enslaved them.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
At least on one interpretation. Interpretation.
Oh, you shattered my image of this kind old woman.
So this is what I meant by that. I love the complexity and the slight ambiguity over this.
Yes. And
it's the fact that Erikson challenges that. If you think of Lorne, I think is a brilliant example of exactly this. Absolutely. We see Lorne as this hard, unfeeling, unsympathetic. She is basically the voice and sword of the Empress.
Right.
She manipulates Perrin totally. She's involved in this grand conspiracy to disband and murder thousands, willingly does all of this. And you hate her. You want to hate her.
Yeah.
And then we have that dinner scene with her, with Tattersail, with Taishrin, with Dujek, and with Tok the Younger.
Yeah.
And during that scene, you find out the history of Tattersail being responsible essentially for the murder of Lorne's family, her friends, and everyone she ever knew.
And up to that point, we loved Tattersail. And we find out she's done this. Yeah.
And so we have the inversion. Tattersail is now a monster, and Lorne is suddenly this broken, damaged person who the Empress has trained and broken and shaped and taken advantage of to turn her into this tool. Yeah. And you go, is that her fault? She was broken by this tragedy and she was manipulated by the Empress. But then, of course, by the end of the book, Lorne decides, no, I am going to do that. And you go, well, there's free will here now, Lorne.
Yeah.
You don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore.
she's the one I was thinking of primarily when I said sometimes characters come close and then they come back. I love the progression though of her character. There's this beautiful passage here. It's on page 427 of my book. If you could indulge me here, I'm going to read a little bit from the book because I just found myself fascinated with this character and the whole idea of her being, as you said, she's been trained. I would hate to think what that training involved, making her into this supposedly emotionless extension of the Empress, her sword, right? Adjunct Lorn. She's the adjunct. Adjunct, I mean, the very word suggests that she has no will of her own, you know. So this passage though, where there's this something waking up in her. It's been waking up in her, and she understands as she's working with Tool, with Onos Tulan. And this is I just think it's fascinating here when she talks about how she has this revelation that, oh, humans have evolved from the Emas, right? Or the Tlan Emas are basically, I mean, we're very much similar to these desiccated things here. It says humans had indeed come from them, had indeed inherited a world. Empire was part of them, a legacy flowing like blood through human muscle, bone, and brain. But such a thing could easily be seen as a curse. Were they destined one day to become human versions of the Tlan Emas? Was war all there was? Would they bow to it in immortal servitude, no more than deliverers of death? And you feel for this woman who thinks of herself as a deliverer of death. And there's this despair. It's palpable. Her despair is absolutely palpable. And that's what doesn't allow her to, at the end, she's a good soldier, right? She does what she's supposed to do.
And you know, but if you think about their plan, yes, let's unleash an undead, jagged tyrant that is going to basically seriously damage the city, either take down Rake or severely weaken Rake, then they can take out Rake and take out the rest of the city and take control. You go, you're going to unleash a supernatural horror that the world is unprepared for.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. Tulin, have you got that? You got that all sorted out? Let's go and do this. You go,
yeah.
At no point is it. Just a side note. Do you honestly think this is a good idea? Like, I'm having second thoughts here.
Huh. Yeah, no, but it's interesting though in the process. And she seems to realize, can we talk about Jaggeds for a moment here? I am utterly fascinated by these things because, and this, I don't want to get too spoilery here for the rest of the series or anything like that, but just sticking to what we know about them, even from just Gardens of the Moon, but I guess I know a little more from reading.
Well, you can take it from Wraith's perspective. Wraith thinks about it and actually expounds on it quite a bit.
Yes, so Wraith is an unusual Jagged. He's gone, AWOL. He's gone psycho. I mean, he's not a typical one because they've walked away. The Jaggeds did what we human beings have never been able to do. They walked away from the machine en masse, right? And they decided, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to walk away. But then you have some of them that turn into tyrants. So it seems like it has the ability to walk away. Is it just sort of suppressing something there, or what's the deal with the Jagged there?
Well, I find it fascinating because obviously you have, there's an issue with discussing the elder races because there's ways of comparing and contrasting them. But if you think about the Jaggeds as described by Wraith, Wraith says basically he wanted to dominate. He wanted to control things, the land around him, to own it, to own the animals, to manipulate them, this feeling of power and control. Yeah. And when animals weren't enough, he wanted sentient beings. Right. And the thing is, he couldn't do it to other Jagged because either they would fight him and he would have to kill them,
right,
or it just wouldn't work. So he found the Emas and went, oh, this is brilliant. They're sentient, but they don't know that I'm messing with them and I can control them. And he plays out this power fantasy. He's addicted to power and control.
Right. And
then when you have, he's thinking about this and how he was imprisoned. And he said, because all of the Jagged, we, as a race, completely abandoned all of this. And then the only time I saw them all together was when they were coming to kick my ass.
Right.
That they banded together in solidarity, in a community, in an army to take down the danger that he represented.
Yeah.
But apart from that, it was no, be an individual, explore the world, be part of the world.
Yes.
Which is obviously very, very different to what Empire, the Malazan Empire, is doing in the novel.
Yeah.
What we think of if you think of the power struggles in Darujistan, where you have the Assassins Guild, a group of people, but with warfare in between, where they're trying to knife each other to get to the top.
Yeah.
But also they're parasitical on the city itself because they're apparently necessary, as we are told, they are necessary to keep the civil wars down because you could just assassinate various members, but there's no rules to it. Right. You have the warfare and the manipulations and the backstabbing that goes on in the politics of Darujistan.
Yeah.
And then the alliances that are formed in response to that. But everything about Darujistan are about these groups, these different fluctuations of power, grouping, allies and enemies. And the Jagat saw this complexity, but saw the danger of it. And that's what they took a step back from.
Yeah.
But we have the Malazan Empire wanting to constantly expand and control. We have the similar thing about the councilman who wants to sell out Darujistan so that he can become ruler of Darujistan. So it's about his own personal power, not what's good for the city. Right. The city wants to remain free. But what does that even mean in this context when you have the council is actually being manipulated by the mages?
Yeah.
The assassins are being used by both sides to try and keep everyone honest, but that's not working. We have a good, honest man, Call, who we find out his wife manipulated him to get rid of him to take over all of his possessions. Yeah. There's a lot going on here about the good and bad of society. And to get to some of the good, we have, look at Crocus, look at Call, look at Murillo, look at Krupp, how they band together to support each other as friends. Yes. There's a friendship group. The Bridge Burners, the group, that squad with Whiskey Jack and Callum and Quick Ben and that friendship and camaraderie, that is a positive sort of function of society. Yeah. So it's not that Erikson, I think, in this book is saying civilization bad, society bad. It's society is nuanced, civilization is nuanced. There is good and bad in it. Right. Here are some examples of it. Read through it. What do you think? What do you want to be more like? Could you be as extreme as the Jagat and just walk away? Because that's an extreme position.
Yes.
Could you be as extreme as the Malazan? Could you be as extreme as the Malazan Empire and want to conquer and control everyone?
Yeah. Yeah. I love your answer there too about the groups of friends in here, and that's a fantasy thing, and it certainly isn't the case that Erikson is always just busting tropes, right? I mean, this is in a sense a fantasy trope it's a really good one to have this kind of camaraderie, this kind of group together. You see it in Glenn Cook's The Black Company. It's very similar. The dynamics between the soldiers, they're keeping each other alive. They're keeping each other sane. Even when Whiskey Jack and Quick Ben and Callum and Fiddler and these guys know that this machine is about to grind them up, that they're on the list of fodder. And what makes them, I think, what keeps them from despair is each other, and that's a beautiful thing.
But here's an interesting point. Number one, both the Bridge Burner squad and sort of Crocus's group of friends.
Yeah.
Think about it in terms of an RPG group. That you look at that and you go, but that's the gaming group. That's the balanced party that you need to go on quests.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how each of them are formed. So there's a trope taken wholesale from gaming that that Erikson has dumped into the narrative.
Yeah.
But then in his exploration of it has disguised the fact. Because when you look at, say, R.A. Salvatore's Forgotten Realms novels with Dritz and Cadibri and Wolfgar and that whole crowd.
Yeah.
Was it the Crystal Shard and those books, the Icewind Dale trilogies, the first one. In that you go, yeah, it's a quest group. Like literally, it's my gaming group. There's all the different characters. These are the roles. It's bold.
Yeah.
Erikson has done exactly the same thing, included exactly the same types of characters, but has disguised it in such a way that it's not immediately obvious that you're looking at two different gaming groups.
Yeah. It's cool. It's really cool.
But one last thing about the squad. It's interesting that, we see the camaraderie, we see their friendship. The squad lie to each other compulsively.
Yes.
Because Whiskey Jack is hiding all of the communication he's had with Dujek from the rest of the squad.
Right.
Callum and Quick Ben are hiding what they're doing from Whiskey Jack.
Yep.
Like everyone is lying to everyone else about what is going on, and they all have plans within plans. So it's not that they're all this happy band of brothers that are all supportive and loving. Like they're sneaky, manipulative characters who have their own agendas.
Yeah.
But they do support each other.
Like a family, I guess, right? And the same is true, of course, of Crocus and Murillo and Raliknam and that group. You're right. They're doing stuff that they're hiding from each other. Well, Krupp seems to know everything, even when they think he doesn't, because he's outside the story, isn't he? He's cheating.
But not only that, Krupp feels no compunction about altering their minds, memories, and perceptions. He casts spells on them to befuddle their memories, and you go, how evil and manipulative is it for someone you trust, someone who you're friends with, you're talking to them, they cast a spell on you to alter your memory, to assault the very essence of who you are as a person, your consciousness, your memory. And Krupp does it without a second thought.
Yeah, it's true.
It's complex morality in these books.
It is. It's really something. It's like life, it's beautiful. Speaking of power, Krupp has a lot of it, but overlooking all of this and dipping their fingers into it and doing various things, there are these gods. And these gods, it's really interesting because what Erikson has done, and as someone, of course, they created this together, we have elder gods. We have who appear in this story. And certainly Krull is obvious as an elder god. There are other characters who are elder gods. I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but there are other characters who are in here. You might not realize they're elder gods, but they're there. And then, of course, there are the ascendants, like Shadow Throne, and they're also pulling a lot of strings. And I find it very interesting what Erikson does with the gods. And it's a narrative device at times that I just don't think you see something like this too often. It does remind one, obviously, of the classical epics where the gods are constantly getting involved. In the Iliad, for example, they have their agenda, let's say, and they're getting at each other. And that seems to be what Opan's whole purpose for existence is to mess up other gods' plans, right? And to use us poor schmucks in the process, right? Here's a sword or here's a coin. Good luck, So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the gods?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because obviously one of the descriptions of Opan, when they talk about why Opan is in this, it's because Opan wants the game. If they're the god of chance, they want the game and as bloody as possible. And the blood of gods is even better. So it's weird. When you initially think of, if someone said there are elder gods and there are new gods, our initial go-to is the elder gods must be much more powerful and the new gods must be weaker. But that's not necessarily the case here. And it's also interesting that the gods are not omniscient. They are not omnipotent.
Right.
And they are kind of immortal. That they're much closer to sort of, say, the Olympians versus the Titans, where there are levels of power, but the gods themselves, they have aspects, they have plans, they have things that they are interested in. So upon the god of chance, they are interested in games. And that's what they get their enjoyment from. It's part and parcel of their very aspect.
Yeah.
Shadow Throne is repeatedly in the novel, you're shown that he giggles insanely.
Yeah.
Shadow Throne is nebulous. He seems involved in a whole lot of different things. You can't follow what he's doing. You can't pin him down in exactly the same way you cannot pin down a shadow.
Yeah.
Cotillion, the rope, the patron of assassins. You know, he is, weirdly enough, in this novel, far more human than
Yes.
Shadow Throne.
Very
Not
much
only does he appear more human, because he appears in human form,
Yeah.
but he has a regret about what he did to Sari,
Yes.
and offers to give her all the memories, to take all the memories away. You know, he poses that to Perrin.
Yeah. There's an echo,
Um,
I think, of the person that he was. I mean, this is not, is it really a spoiler to mention who they were? I don't think so. I mean, you probably figured it out if you've read Gardens of the Moon, I think, right?
yeah, well, I thought it was fairly, because of the juxtaposition of the information, because
Right.
you have references to the Emperor and his companion Dancer
Right.
disappearing and assuming that Lucine has killed them,
Yeah.
and you have Shadow Throne and Cotillion, a type of dance,
Yeah.
suddenly appearing and wanting to mess with the Empire and with Lucine for personal reasons.
Okay.
I thought it was very obvious from the beginning that there's a connection between them.
Yeah. So I don't feel this is a spoiler for the series, just to say that that Kellanved and Dancer, the Emperor and his right-hand man, are Shadow Throne and the Rope. And it's interesting because I do see that compassion in Cotillion, and it reminds me of this character I got to know. And I don't want to talk about that. It could be spoilery, I guess, because I recently read Esselmont's Path to Ascendancy, and you get to know this character. And you know, for an assassin, he's a super nice guy. You know, he's a compassionate person, and you see that, and you notice that the gods, like I said before, the gods themselves, you know, as much as even Empress Lessine has very few choices, it seems to me that when you're in the position of an ascendant, you're pretty limited in what you can do.
But you have spheres of influence that you can operate in, whereas humans are not limited by a sphere of influence; they're limited by access to power.
Right.
Gods are limited by spheres of influence. But what's really interesting, that initial slaughter at Idokan,
Yes.
where you have that squad of soldiers, one of whom has just killed a little old lady.
Yeah.
But
not just soldiers, a lot of civilians died in that attack.
Hang on a sec. So they send out the hounds and they wipe out a fishing village and the soldiers to hide their tracks.
Yeah.
Later on, you find out that they're going to repopulate the entire coast because 3 villages were wiped out. And you go, hang on a sec. Shadow Throne and Cotillion didn't wipe out 3 villages.
Ah.
That was Lorne. That was the exchange she had with the captain. Yeah. And he then was sending people out. They were going to wipe everyone out on the off chance that there was one of these witnesses.
So no witnesses. That's also what happens to the garrison of soldiers, right? Where the pigeons are. They were killed by the Empire, right? They weren't killed by Shadow Throne and Cotillion, I believe. Or
it's hard to tell because pigeons are a weird anachronism to Gardens of the Moon. They don't show up anywhere else.
Okay. It was a strange scene, but Perrin comes across this garrison. Everybody's dead inside, and I assumed that they were silenced because they didn't want anybody. No information about this incident was to be released.
But Erikson doesn't give us a direct explanation for this. Number one, it could have been Shadow Throne and Cotillion because this was where Sari signed up. Or it could have been on orders of the Empress to get rid of anyone who had heard about this thing because she doesn't want anyone knowing that Shadow Throne and Cotillion are around.
Right.
So there's an ambiguity there. And, the reader can pick which they find more persuasive.
Right.
Which is both work.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, hard truths are not exactly easy to come by here. So.
But Lucine and Lucine's motivations.
Yeah.
Like we get a sense of who Lucine is from that very brief sort of almost cameo at the beginning.
Yeah.
But from that point on, it's what's relayed to us about Lucene and what Lucene wants from Lorne and from Tayshrin.
Right.
And as we learn, Tayshrin, who comes across as one of the most evil, horrible, callous, awful human beings.
Yeah.
When it's revealed that Lorne is taking over and Tayshrin's like, oh, thank God. Thank God there's someone here who's taking over and going to handle this. I'm way out of my depth.
Yeah.
And you suddenly realize that what Tayshrin has been doing has been him feeling and enacting what he thinks the Empress wants. He has murdered thousands because he thought that's what Lucene wanted.
Yeah.
At no point has Lucene, we never see Lucene say, you need to do this. We get the idea that she had said, oh, would someone rid me of this troublesome priest?
Yeah.
And, oh, lo and behold, Tayshrin's gone and done this.
Yeah.
But Lorne's plan, which we know was concocted by Lucene, is of such devious horribleness, but yet brilliance. Because no matter what happens, whether the Jagged Tyrant takes out Rake or Rake takes out the Tyrant, the Empire wins.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's only because of the interactions of the Darujhistan sort of RPG group and the Bridgeburner squad, only because of their actions, does the Empire lose.
Yep.
Or do they? Because we get Dujek set up for the next thing, which is potentially what Lucene wanted him to do. It's wills within wills within wills.
Yeah.
That the complexity of all of this, and this is where these stories are complex. To try and hold everything in your head is difficult.
Yeah.
But
political
you can read that entire story and follow along, and it's revealed to you that, oh my God, all these things happened, and you can enjoy it without knowing the full extent of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. It's just it's a gorgeous read. And I am so happy that I am doing this reread. I mentioned in the beginning how much I am enjoying this reread is just incredible because, you know, I read the series of 10, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, a couple of years ago. And the whole time I was reading it was in admiration, but felt I'm missing something here. I'm not getting something here. And it was almost frustrating because I knew it was brilliant and I wasn't quite where I wanted to be. So I said to myself, somewhere in the middle, I know I have to reread these books. And I had heard that there were other books in the series, that there were these prequels. And I thought, you know, I've got to read all this other stuff first and get myself ready so that when I read this again, I'm going to just absorb it and love it and without having to work so hard. And I'm there now and it feels fantastic. I just absolutely had a wonderful time reading Gardens of the Moon. I am so looking forward to the rest of these books and to the rest of our discussions. So
yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you once again for having me on. I'm looking forward to the next one. At least this time I'll have slightly longer to prepare.
Yes, we're going to have longer. We're going to do book 2 in a month. So look for us in late January. So absolutely.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Have a great holiday break.
All right. Happy holidays. Cheers. Thank you.